3, 2, 1, 0.
Good morning. Welcome to the second day of the Bruegel Annual Meetings, and actually the first day of a hybrid event in a very, very long time, in 18 months. We are delighted that we can welcome a few people here present in the audience, as well, of course, the live streaming. And thank you all for joining us. I'm joined today with Henry Foy from the Financial Times, and we are continuing the conversation that we started actually yesterday on the first day on the recovery programs in Europe. And on this first session, we are very honored to have the Minister of Finance of Poland, Tadeusz Kościński, who is joining us on live stream. We are going to take a little bit of time to discuss the program of Poland. The Minister will give us an introduction to the issue, and then we will have a conversation with him, as well as try and include conversation with our audience. So we will continue the same system as yesterday in terms of taking questions. Please join in on Slido and typing the hashtag BAM21recovery. Please pose a question for the Minister. Both Henry and I will be looking at the questions as they come in, and we will try and weave those questions into the conversation for the Minister. So, Minister, good morning. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you very well. We are delighted to have you. Please, the floor is yours for your introductory remarks.
Thank you very much, Maria, and good morning to you also, Henry. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Thank you very much for your kind invitation. The Bruegel Institute is one of the most influential European think tanks, and the quality of its research is continuously increasing its impact on policy making. It's therefore my honour and a great privilege to be here and to address this exceptional audience. We're meeting here a year and a half after the COVID-19 pandemic started. The latest forecasts provided by the IMF and other analysts indicate that we can expect economic recovery with GDP rising by nearly 5% this year and similarly in 2022 in both the EU and the whole of the EU area. However, the recovery is not to be taken for granted as the virus remains with us, and of course its impact is largely uncontrolled by us. The pandemic has left scars on our economies and has taken a heavy toll on society. Our reaction to the unprecedented crisis was fast and adequate. The negative effects of the pandemic on output, unemployment, poverty, inequality were cushioned by providing significant fiscal and monetary policy. In this regard, let me draw your attention to the findings of the recent IMF working paper on recovering after pandemics, the role of policies and structural features. Its authors studied the economic effects of 5 past pandemics since the year 1990. Their findings confirm that fiscal and structural policies play a significant role in alleviating the effects of the crisis and foster an inclusive recovery. The negative output effects are limited for countries that provided relatively greater fiscal support. The fallout of the COVID-19 pandemic has significantly changed the macroeconomic landscape globally, and the COVID-19 crisis significantly worsened fiscal balances across the whole of Europe, causing public debt to rise. Against this background, I think the discussion about the reform of the Stability and Growth Pact, launched in February last year by the European Commission, should be continued. Coming back to the situation from before the pandemic just doesn't seem justified at this stage. Application of the current fiscal framework would require considerable consolidation efforts, with the risk of derailing the ongoing recovery. Needless to say, a necessary increase in public investment in order to facilitate recovery and pursue a rapid green transition would also be very difficult to reconcile with the EU fiscal rules. The EU responded to the crisis with a very much needed macroeconomic package. The next generation EU was up to 750 billion euros. This package, coupled with fiscal support measures undertaken at national level, is an indispensable response to mitigate the impact of the crisis and guarantee sustainable recovery. Speaking of the economic impact of the Next Generation EU, we should not concentrate only on national envelopes. Macroeconomic effects of the package should be assessed, also taking into account fiscal spillovers, for instance, from trade flows and financial markets. I'm glad that we worked together, the EU institutions and member states, to prepare such an impressive package in such a short time. Work continues on the national recovery and resilience plans. These comprehensive plans are drafted under time pressure and assessed by the European Commission in a very short period of time. The process is thus far extremely intensive and challenging, but already the majority of plans have been approved. Disbursement of available pre-financing under this facility has already started. The overall aim of the Recovery and Resilience Plan focuses on the following goals: economic recovery from the COVID-19 crisis, greater resilience to future economic shocks, and advancing the green and digital transition, while at the same time paying due attention to economic and social sustainability. Let me say a few words about the implementation challenges, as we are about to enter the implementation stage soon, I hope, here in Poland. Smooth and credible implementation will be key for the success of the Next Generation EU. The deadline for project implementations is 2023, and the deadline for payments is 2026. So this short period may be a challenge for member states to complete the projects, achieve the outcomes of reforms, as well as conform to procedures at the EU level. The swift implementation of projects is essential, but the quality of projects is even more important. Fast implementation should not be at the cost of quality. Recovery funds should be deployed to finance high-quality projects that would not be possible to finance in any other way. We should therefore avoid a crowding out effect where resilience and recovery fund sources simply replace existing funding sources. Let me use Poland's recovery plan as an example. When drafting our plan, we aimed at selecting reforms and investments which will bring the biggest impact to the recovery and would create a long-lasting foundation for building a healthy and resistant economy to possible future shocks. Projects implemented under this instrument shall contribute to the green and digital transformation of the economy. The climate and energy challenge is among our top priorities, and this plan gives us a great opportunity to address this challenge. We're going to promote investments in renewable energy sources, improvements to air quality. Regulatory solutions will be accompanied by investments supporting, amongst others, developing offshore wind power and hydrogen technologies. It will also be important to improve the energy efficiency of residential and public buildings, which also help companies to introduce green solutions in their operations. We also aim at increasing the share of sustainable forms of mobility and to reduce the pressure of transport on the environment, as well as to improve safety, especially on the roads. Digital transformation is another priority area. We would like to meet the challenges of ensuring the development of a modern digital communication infrastructure and e-services solutions, exploiting the potential of breakthrough technologies, digital education, increasing the digital competence of society, and of course, most importantly, cybersecurity. Last but not least, we want to support the competitiveness and innovativeness of key sectors of the Polish economy. The circular economy is our key area of interest, reducing resource consumption, minimizing waste production, extending product life, or the entire eco-design process. To be able to implement these changes, we will support cooperation between science and enterprises and properly prepared human capital. In parallel to the reforms and investments envisaged in our program, we designed an additional package of reforms, a program which we call the Polish Deal. It's focused on 5 pillars aimed at increasing spending on healthcare to 7% of GDP, creating a more progressive and fair tax and social security system through the reduction of the tax wage for people with low incomes, significant public investment program in the area of roads, railway and digital infrastructure, social facilities and green energy, supporting the housing market via a range of new instruments like state guarantees for part of the mortgage loans for low-income families, supporting old age pensioners with changes in the tax system to lower the tax burden on this sector. The Polish deal not only provides financing, but also introduces some changes in order to make our tax and social security system more progressive by alleviating fiscal burdens to low earners. Here I should mention our ongoing efforts, and one of my priorities, to mobilise domestic revenue and our common EU budget. The latter shall be financed through new sources such as carbon border levy, financial transaction tax, and of the utmost priority, the digital taxation aspect. Nowadays, the EU priorities for the coming years should be verified and supplemented with the priority of the recovery and reconstruction of industry and services here within the EU, which should become less dependent on supplies from third countries and be based on the digital transformation. As a consequence, the priorities should be redefined, putting more stress on the digital economy. And I hope that the recent G20 and OECD proposals will finally materialize this year. Thanks very much for your attention. Thank you.
Mr. Minister, can you hear me?
Yeah.
It's lovely to see you after so many years. Thank you so much for your introductory remarks. I'm going to cut to the chase and the elephant in the room, if you like, or in the cyberspace room. Of course, your plan, as you said, hasn't yet been approved by the Commission. I wonder if I can ask you this morning, how confident are you that it will be approved, and when? And as a follow-up, do you understand the concerns raised by the Commission and the reasons for their delay? Of course, they've now gone beyond the 2-month deadline they set themselves to approve it. And are you confident that those concerns will be addressed?
Well, first of all, as you know, like in UK, everything stops at 5 o'clock, so everything stops in Western Europe in August. So now, hopefully, tea over and some occasions over, we'll get back to negotiating, discussing the technicalities. But in principle, I think the Commission has approved our plan. It's really, we're now looking at the nitty-gritty, at the milestones, and really very deep details. So I don't think there's any real problem there for the Commission about our concept, our projects. However, as you mentioned, in parallel, there is the other elephant in the room, which I don't think it should, one should be affecting the other, but at the moment it seems like it is. But I hope that very soon that perhaps that there will be decoupled and we will receive the green light by the Commission and then by the ECOFIN ministers of finance to go ahead with our recovery and resilience plan.
Just as a follow-up, you said in your opening remarks that, of course, there's quite a tight time zone here. How late can you wait? Really delayed, and you start to miss your own deadlines on the Polish deal.
Well, we don't really plan to implement any major projects this year. We are actually working all the time. It's not that we stopped, we're sitting, and we're also on holiday because the Commission is on holiday. No, we're actually working, and this is just really another source of funding for us. These are projects which we intend to do one way or another. So we are preparing, we are building the structure for the projects, and hopefully when the Commission gives a green light and the funding starts coming through, that's when things will actually physically happen. But I think we are building the virtual infrastructure for the project at this stage.
Thank you very much, Minister, for your comments. First of all, there appears to be a problem with the audio. The people in the live stream cannot hear us. So can you please check that they can hear us okay? Minister, you talked about both of the big package that has been given, the recovery fund for the whole of Europe, its importance, the macro implications of that. Hopefully we can come back to that at the end. But if for a minute, I'm sure Henry will agree, if you can stay a little bit with the Polish program and how you see it going forward. You talked a lot about the types of projects that you would like to implement with the money that you're claiming from the fund. Can you tell us a little bit more about distributional aspects? How do you see that the funds, the way that they're dedicated right now, and having quickly looked at the program yesterday, a lot of it will go in the green transition. There is a lot of it that can actually be a burden, a disproportionate burden for the weak. Have you thought about how to distribute the burden in a way that is becoming equitable, and then we are truthful to the fair green transition?
Well, first of all, the way we want to distribute the funds and the projects, I think Poland, like all the other countries, has learned their lesson from the pandemic, that we have all underinvested in the health sector. And so I think this is the priority for us to invest in the health sector. Of course, another not so obvious before the pandemic was that we probably underinvested in the educational sector. We were still really in the analog space. We weren't. None of us were really ready for the sudden move to the digital education. So this is another sector which we need to significantly invest in. Of course, everything now is digital, so that's a no-brainer. That's the third area. And of course, everybody wants to live in a clean environment. So the energy sector, the energy transition is also one of the key areas where we'll be investing under the National Resilience and Recovery Fund, also under the Polish deal funds. How we will be monitoring this? It's a multi-layer effect. It's of course, as a Minister of here, I've put my hat on as the Minister of Funds and the Regional Policy. My ministry is the ministry that will coordinate all the funding and all the projects. But then under us, there's another layer of all the ministers of the relevant ministries, like the Ministry of Development, the Ministry of Climate, the Ministry of Infrastructure, Energy, etc., will be overseeing the projects in their sectors. And then we have a layer of where we have the NGOs, our social partners, local authorities, etc., will be monitoring to make sure that the distribution of funds is appropriate. So it's at various different levels, and this will be put into the legal act, which we're planning to put through in Parliament now in the autumn, so that everybody can see, and we are transparent as to how the funds will be distributed and monitored.
And if I may have a quick follow-up on that, so is it fair to say that the program is more tilted than recovery from COVID-19, or is it on long-term projects?
It's a bit of both, of course. So we need to make sure that we have projects which are very quickly implemented for the recovery. But the impact, the effect is, we hope, long term. So it's not just a short term effect, but everything that we're hoping that we'll be implementing soon will have a medium and long term effect as well.
Minister, jump in here on implementation. I mean, of course, just getting this through Parliament in Poland almost broke the government, brought down the ruling government and the party that are currently in charge of Poland. When we talk about implementation, of course, I mean, there's no guarantee that the current composition of the Parliament and the government will continue in Poland. I mean, it now doesn't have a majority. There is a constant struggle every day to get legislation through Parliament. As a minister in charge of long-term planning and getting this money through and getting it spent, does it concern you that you can't always depend on the structure and the confidence of the ruling party week by week?
No, I don't think so. I think politics aside, I think both the ruling party and the opposition, once they've made their speeches and the media have said, repeated what they've said, then they do actually vote. I think, if I remember rightly, the vote wasn't quite as clear-cut, as close as everybody was expecting. There was tactical voting or tactical unvoting at the same time. So I expect that the act will go through, because I firmly believe that everybody's interests in this, most important is, of course, monitoring, have been included, and so the local authorities, the NGOs, social representatives, and I think it's the monitoring should suffice to make sure that no one side actually drags the funding to themselves.
I mean, would you include your cabinet colleagues in that? I mean, Minister Ziobro said recently that Poland should not remain in the EU at any cost, given that we're talking about not cost here, but actually 30 plus billion euros to Poland. Do you agree with his comments?
Not for me to agree or disagree. It's his comments. He's a politician. I'm the Minister of Finance and the Minister of Funds. My job's technical, really, to make sure that we maximise the benefit for Poland and for Europe. And I couldn't imagine that a country like Europe isn't the beneficiary of funding coming out from Europe. I think that'll be a tremendous loss, not only for Poland but for the whole of Europe. So it's not something that is on my radar.
But is that kind of rhetoric difficult for you as someone who's trying to convince the Commission that you're serious about this, when you have cabinet colleagues, senior ministers saying things like that? It can't help convincing the Commission that your plan is ready and you're serious about full long-term implementation.
But I think we've got to separate. The plan is one thing, and we're talking and negotiating on the technical issues. I think in parallel we have the discussion on the judiciary and other aspects there. I firmly believe that at the end of the day, both sides will understand, and an appropriate compromise will be made.
I may also take on from Henry's comment on this and moving to what I think it's an issue that is discussed continuously, and that is the governance of the fund and how you would actually deliver on the things that you promised you deliver, and how it would be a monitoring of the things that are promised to be delivered. We had a huge discussion with the Minister of Spain yesterday on this issue, and I feel that I ought to ask you as well. At the end of the day, what in your view will be a successful plan? So 6 years from now, 7 years from now, what would you like to see for this plan to be considered successful? And how are you going to ensure that it becomes successful?
Well, first of all, hopefully in 3 to 6 years' time, we'll have not only implemented the plans, but we'll have received the financing for them, because that's the most important, is that we actually get in 2026 all the financing that we expected to get. And I think this is probably one of the most core aspects of monitoring actually the progress, because it's not that we're going to like other projects in the EU, we get money up front and then we do the project. Here we actually there's some, I think 10% is up front, but then we have to every 6 months we have these milestones, and these milestones will be monitored by the EU ministers of finance. So it's not some one bureaucrat in Brussels, but it's the whole a group of the Ministry of Finance. So I think we have the appropriate controls there to make sure that what we say that we will do is actually done, because otherwise we run the risk of actually not being reimbursed for the funds that we've used so far for the project. So I think this is probably the most important aspect of the whole process, to ensure that everybody, not only Poland but every country, conforms to what they said they actually did.
Perhaps you can bring in questions that are coming in from our audience, and they're moving a little bit. I mean, I think we should stay with the Polish program, but also bring in more general questions. There is a question posed here, which I think is in everybody's mind, whether the RRF should remain a one-off instrument, or are you in favor of making this more permanent? What would be your view on this?
To be honest, at this stage we're only looking at it as a one-off, because we have the complementary Polish deal, which will expect the RRF is very strongly geared towards energy and digitalization. There are other aspects of the economy which we have to look after. We have to look after and make sure that we have a fair distribution of wealth in Poland, which is what we're implementing through our Polish deal, which isn't addressed through the RRF. So I think the RRF has its reason. that's true, but I think there are other requirements, and so whether we have the same RRF or a different RRF, whatever happens, we're going to have other sort of projects, so domestic projects.
But if I may take on from this, it's not necessarily the instrument itself, but I think the argument is, or the question behind this argument is whether there is a greater need for fiscal risk sharing, or is that not necessary? The RRF has a very specific purpose, and that is very much helping after the pandemic. It is designed as a one-off, it will end. But the issue is not whether the instrument will survive, whether RRF type of instruments are necessary, or this is a very premature question, which is actually what the Minister of Spain said yesterday. This is not something we should be discussing now.
Well, this is a discussion perhaps from a slightly different perspective. Are the fiscal regulations which the EU imposes, is it possible for them to stay post-pandemic? Because as we know that most countries in Europe, the debt has gone above 90%. The average, in fact, is 92% in Europe, whereas the plan should be below 60%. So will the EU enforce that and enforce fiscal consolidation, which can considerably complicate the recovery plan? So the discussion there has to be taken into account, and to see where our plan, where our horizon should be going forward. So should we be still staying to below 3% deficit and below 60% debt, or some loosening there, or perhaps loosening on various type of investments, etc.?
Mr. Minister, can I ask directly, will the Polish deal, as it were, go ahead regardless of the release of the funds from the EU?
Absolutely. Of course, it does use some of the funds that are coming from the EU, but it's a minority. The Polish deal really is there to reset the tax system in Poland. We've had 30 years of growth apart from last year. We're actually fortunate in that we're now back in the space we were in December 2019. So the effects of the recession have gone behind us. But that's the whole of the country hasn't benefited. We have various areas which have benefited more, various sectors, and we really need to reset that. And that's the main aspect of the Polish deal, to reset so that the low earners pay lower tax. Because unfortunately in Poland we have the situation where our tax system is degressive. The more you earn, relatively, the less you pay in taxes, which is I think relatively unique in Europe.
But some of the elements of the Polish plan submitted to the Commission around green energy, around digital transformation, education, aren't these things that the Polish government should have been doing anyway, regardless of the pandemic?
Yes, but I think that's everybody's clever after the fact. It's a question of doing more of it. Of course, we were doing things on the green environment. Remember that where we start, because it seems to be that everybody thinks we all start in the same position and we're migrating. No, we're 50 years behind, and you can add another 100 years to that, because we're very much coal-based. And not because of we wanted to, but that's the way history forced us to. And so we have a different problem to countries, or most countries in Western Europe, who are relatively green already, and they're just going to be even greener. We're anything but green, and we have to very quickly catch up. And it's not just a matter of funding, and so money coming in from recovery and resistance funds. That's not enough. We also have to look after the social aspect. There are people, at the end of the day, there are people involved. There are miners, a big community of miners, which we need to make sure that they understand what's happening and make sure they're on board.
I just wanted to. There's been a question regarding the Commission's delay on approving your plan. Would you be able to sort of verbalise directly to us today? Have you been told by the Commission what the problems really are, or are you working, like many of us, on assumptions and trying to connect the dots?
I would say that we're both very, how shall I put it, elegant and diplomatic, and we don't ask the questions for answers we don't want. I've lost you.
I was going to say, is that a little bit like putting your head in the sand, though?
Help either side. Well, what's the point? We know that we're doing. We don't perceive that we're losing time. Perhaps we'll lose a month or so in the upfront down payments. But we are working on the projects, and so the more we're working with the Commission on the talking about the milestones and the details, the more aware both sides are of what needs to be done. So we'd be better prepared. So it's not that we've put everything in the bottom drawer and just sitting and waiting for something to happen. No, we're still working on a daily basis, negotiating, discussing, and making ourselves more aware of what we have to do in the future.
And you originally said that nobody works in August, which is a fair remark. But now it's September. Do you think you could have an approval this month?
In September, I hope so. Yes, I hope so. I'm positive. I think the discussions are good. We have a very good relationship with the Commission, very, very fruitful, constructive, and hopefully that the Commission will give the green light, and so it goes forward to the ECOFIN for approval.
No, naturally, we're all hoping for a good outcome. There's a lot at stake. There's a lot of money that Poland is receiving through the RRF. I have here the numbers on the grant side. It's about 24 billion. And then on the loan side, you have not requested the maximum amount allotted to Poland. Is there a reason for that? I mean...
Well, first of all, just so it's the large amount on the grant side. Of course, it's one of the reasons, why it's taking longer for us to complete the documentation on the fund, because there's a lot of money being ploughed into Poland, and so a lot of projects and a lot of topics to discuss. On the loan side, well, we're looking at we don't have a problem funding in Poland. So why necessarily sign up for something that we have to say that we're borrowing money from the Commission? It's not that easy to find appropriate projects that quickly, which are very, very important to us, that we need to borrow at this stage. We can borrow from the markets in due course if we decide that projects which haven't been included in this Resilience Recovery Fund projects that they are actually required. So we can then finance from other areas.
If I may pick up on an issue that you actually raised in your introductory remark, the issue of, there's a trade-off between the speed at which you absorb funds versus the quality of the projects. And, are you happy that you will be able to absorb all the funds that you are requesting?
Well, this is something that we're actually working on all the time together with the Commission to make sure we can, and also one of the reasons why, as I say, that we're not necessarily wanting to take advantage of all the borrowing that we can, because there always is the risk that we won't fit into the time, the window that the Commission has given, and that means that the funding will have to come out from us anyway. And it's not something I want to, as a Minister of Finance now, that I want to have projects in Poland which I don't particularly want or need as a priority. But at the end of the day, I find that whether I want to or not, I have to start financing them. So this is sort of the balancing act that we're having in Poland to make sure that projects which are being financed through through lending are actually not projects which could happen that we have to finance ourselves afterwards.
But just to pick up on that, you did say that you would be prepared to finance some of them, correct?
That's right. Of course, it's different if a company says that they're going to implement some sort of project and they get the money from the EU and then they repay the money to the EU, rather than they say they're going to get the funding, and at the end of the day the tab drops on my desk, and that means the money that I have to pay for that project, because it's already started and I have to cover the cost. That means I can't use the money for other aspects, for other projects in Poland. So that's why I'm a bit wary of those type of projects.
Yeah, with that, Minister, we are coming towards the end, and since we have you here, we can't help but also ask you a few questions about future issues. How do you see the future? One of the biggest discussions, of course, will be the issue of the fiscal architecture. The immediate one, you raised it in one of your comments, the fiscal rules. Obviously, for the moment, the framework itself is not in operation. It's temporarily suspended, equivalent to suspended, given the crisis that we have to deal with. As we are more and more vaccinated, we're coming out of the crisis, we will have to go back to some sort of rules. There are good reasons why we have fiscal rules. And what's your take on this discussion, which no doubt will commence very quickly in the constellation of ministers in Europe?
Of course, first of all, brave words from Maria that we're getting out of the pandemic. We're in Poland is just going into the fourth wave, and really none of us actually know how hard it's going to hit us. So although our public finances are at the moment very in a healthy situation, and in fact our budget for next year already is that the deficit will be under 3%, so 2.8%, already in compliance with the EU a year ahead of their plan, and our national debt will be at 55%, so again below 60%. But we probably will be pre-funding for other issues next year, and so because we really don't know what's going to happen with the pandemic. Now going back to the architecture, we actually have a meeting of finance ministers next week in Slovenia, and this will be on the table. It'd be interesting to see how various ministers, what their perspectives are about how quickly should we consolidate our fiscal finances, and because of course we run the risk of slowing down the recovery, which I think at the moment in Poland and most of Europe is going quite well.
I mean, there are a lot of uncertainties in terms of the timing of the fiscal consolidation, and whether it should be early or should be later. I mean, our experience from the financial crisis was that it shouldn't be too early. I think there is some understanding of this, but at the same time, we have legacy issues. We have a huge debt. So this is one set of problems. And the other set of problems is the investment needs. If you go forward, I mean, some of them will be addressed with the grants that are given from the RFF. A lot more needs to be done at the national level. How should this be financed, and what would that imply for fiscal policy and the coordination aspect of fiscal policy at the EU?
I think you're absolutely right. This is the contradiction that we have. On one side, the current architecture, and at the same time, we're trying to invest. So this is the point that we'll probably be discussing. Should investments be included in the architecture, and how they should be, and what type of investments? Because there are investments which are needed, and then they grow the economy. There's some investments which are not necessarily needed. They're just nice to have, and so perhaps we'll have to be working out some sort of solution to allow for investments which are needed, which are guaranteed to actually develop the economy and give a payback, as opposed to investments which just nice to have a better road, but doesn't actually make any difference to the economy.
What's your view on how to treat investments in the fiscal rules?
I think there's other aspects which I wouldn't necessarily want to bring up today, but I think there are other investments which are different for different countries. The countries, as you know, where we have a hybrid war going on at the moment with Belarus, and so the aspect of defense security is definitely going to be rising to the top of agenda, and the financing for that at the same time. And of course, countries in the Central and Eastern Eastern Europe, which are closer to the problem, have a different perspective than countries to the west of Europe. So we need to discuss and understand their various perspectives.
Henry, one last question perhaps for the Minister?
I was going to ask about something completely off topic, but the remark about Belarus has now changed my approach. But I will ask, if you forgive me, Mr. Minister, I want to ask about the G7 tax deal. You were one of the big supporters of it, and then you asked for a carve-out alongside Hungary for domestic business and to not have the global G7 dictating domestic tax rates. Isn't the problem, though, that if every country asks for a carve-out, it won't be a global tax deal? And how do we get around that?
Well, first of all, we've got to define what the carve-out's all about. The carve-out is for companies who actually do real business in our country. Then they should be paying tax here, and we should be dictating what the tax is. So it's not the carve-out, isn't that countries can actually register here in Poland and pay lower taxes on their income from other countries. Absolutely not. It's the income they generate in Poland that we should actually decide in Poland how much tax should be paid. So I think this aspect is actually accepted by most of the G7 countries, that we're not trying to create another tax haven. It really is for taxes which are generated here in Poland from the Polish economy.
You said that many countries agree with you on that. Are we seeing momentum towards a final deal, do you think?
I think so, yes. I think the latest which I heard is really about the level of the carve-out. It's not whether the carve-out should be, it's actually the level of carve-outs. Of course, the countries in Central and Eastern Europe, which we can't compete on infrastructure, etc., with the Western countries. Our infrastructure isn't good enough. We haven't got the research and development yet that the Western countries have. So we can only compete, say, on lower costs, and that includes the tax costs. Of course, Western countries don't particularly like that, and they want to have the carve-out minimum possible. And this is where we need to find a golden centre that will allow us to all be evenly happy or evenly unhappy.
Minister, since Henry has opened up the discussion, a very final question also for me. Are you hopeful that we will find the global cooperation that we need in order to vaccinate faster and solve the climate faster at the global level?
Well, this is wishful thinking. I hope so, but whether it will happen, it all depends whether we'll be nationalistic or whether we'll be looking at our own economies. And so it's of course, it's very easy to say yes and then to go and do your own thing. That's unfortunately which may happen, but we will live in hope.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for that, Minister. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm afraid that's all we have time for today. Thank you for taking the time to discuss the Polish program and your thoughts on broader issues. That's all we have time for today. And let me thank also our audience here and watching from the live stream. Stay tuned. We'll be back in 15 minutes.